Welcome back to Nothing But the Truth in a special one-hour episode on the Obama visit. Remember, the American president arrives Sunday morning at 10 a.m. We turn now to the political dimension of this critical visit. Lalit Mansingh, does this visit signal a sea change or at least a significant upgradation in the relationship? To quote one of your successors as Foreign Secretary, Sham Saran, he says, the visit is the cake. Would you agree?
The visit is the cake.
That's his exact words.
No, this is the first
Not
visit.
the visit takes the cake, the visit is the cake.
Okay. I think there's much more substance than just the symbolism of a visit. To my mind, this is the first time a foreign head of state comes to India and discusses serious business. Republic Day is generally a celebration. There's a lot of substance going with this. I won't say it's a transformational visit. It's not groundbreaking, because the ground has been broken already. But in terms of seriousness of meetings, this would rank very high. It would rank along with the Manmohan Singh's visit in 2005. It would rank with Modi's visit to Washington in September and now.
Krishnan Srinivasan, we've heard news on Saturday afternoon that President Obama has cancelled the Agra trip to see the Taj. And the explanation being given is that he's going to Saudi Arabia to attend the funeral, or not the funeral, but the funeral obsequies of the late King Abdullah. Now, one explanation being given by sources is that the Saudis objected to the fact that if Obama hadn't gone, they were going to get the Vice President Biden, and Obama felt he couldn't offend a critical ally. From the Indian government's point of view, is that understandable, or will the Indian government be a little disappointed?
Well, I think it's understandable. I think the Saudis would have expected the President of the USA to be there for the King's funeral. And I think to that extent, considering the relationship that the Saudis and the Americans have had over such a long period, I think it is understandable, though regrettable. Okay. But I must say again that, as an aside, that it's very difficult, I think, for the head of an important democratic country to be seen having a quote-unquote holiday anywhere, sightseeing. It's not something that fits in very well with programs of leaders from democratic countries when they're abroad, and especially when their country is demanding their presence in one way or another, politically, economically, or whatever. So I think that
may well be understandable. Let me stop you there. That may well be understandable, and that may well be a second concern that the American president has in mind.
I
want to come, Sanjay Baru, to Pakistan, because when you talk about India-American relations, whether we like it or not, Pakistan is always the elephant in the room. Now, in recent days, we've had reports that America has warned Islamabad against any untoward incident while Obama is in India. Earlier, Kerry warned Pakistan to take tough action against the LET. News reports suggest that, in fact, Pakistan has banned JUD and Falah Insaniyat, although those news reports are now being questioned a little bit. But side by side, PTI has also reported that the Americans and the British have together told Pakistan either hand over Zakir Rahman Lakvi to India or to one of us, because he needs to be brought to justice. Now, if all of that is true, and perhaps that is a big if, does it suggest that the Americans are beginning to apply pressure on Pakistan on India's behalf?
Well, first of all, to use the correct zoological metaphor, the elephant in the room when India and the United States meet is China. Pakistan is the monkey in the room. So I think we need to get...
I'll permit you that little bit of insult to Pakistan.
No, I mean, in terms of magnitude, I mean, the real elephant in the room is China.
I would say the dragon in the room.
The dragon. But... well, I mean, look, up to a point, we would expect the US to put some pressure on Pakistan, and up to a point, they would do that. But I don't think India expects other countries to frame their bilateral relationship on the basis of our priorities, just as we would not frame our bilateral relationships based on American priorities. I think we have an independent foreign policy. The United States has an independent foreign policy. But to the extent that we both have shared concerns about terrorism, particularly in the region, I think there has already been considerable working together, and that will only increase.
Let me put the same question to you, Fred Jagal, because you reflect, in a sense, the thinking in Washington, D.C. We in India would like to interpret this as the first sign that in that triumvirate of relationships, America is slightly shifting its position more in favor with India and slightly away or slightly more skeptical of Islamabad. To what extent do you agree? To what extent do you disagree?
Well, the fact that there is skepticism about Islamabad is not new. But the fact that there are pressures on Islamabad in a way and demand for Islamabad to act more decisively against terrorism, against the elite, against the ethnic group is not new either. So that those things were repeated the week before the President Obama came to India is just in the order of things. And the fact that
it could even be a coincidence, you're suggesting.
No, I'm not saying it's a coincidence. It's just a diplomatic gesture, which I guess will be appreciated here. As for the response of Islamabad, again, the proof of the pudding is in the eating, so let's wait to see what they will actually do.
Ajay Shukla, when he was in Pakistan just about 2 weeks ago, Secretary of State Kerry publicly said that India and Pakistan must sort out their problems together, and he was more or less advocating, without saying it in so many words, that they should sit down and start talking. Will Obama, when he comes to Delhi, give similar advice to Mr. Modi, albeit behind closed doors? And if he does, will Mr. Modi bristle or will Mr. Modi take it in his stride?
Karan, a lot of what we are listening is related to the upcoming visit. They are making nice with India because they know that India wants to hear some of these things. When Kerry was in Pakistan, he said exactly what Pakistan wanted to hear. So this United States double game that goes on, I don't mean this in a derogatory sense, but this is the way diplomacy is done by superpowers. We should not take each one of these statements literally without seeing the context of where the statement is made. But what is important in this particular case, I mean, to answer your question first, I am almost certain that any advice to talk to Pakistan will take place behind closed doors. In public, only a bland statement will be made that the United States supports the resumption of dialogue between India and Pakistan. But it's very important that if one looks at the Deputy National Security Advisor's briefing to the White House media before the presidential visit, India's role in Iran and in Afghanistan has been acknowledged to an almost unprecedented degree. They actually said that India is supporting the United States in Afghanistan, and India's relations with Iran, its old civilizational relations with Iran, positions it uniquely to play a larger role. There are signals going out over here. Similarly, on Afghanistan, the United States was unusually forthcoming in saying during this pre-visit briefing that India will be playing a larger role and the United States look forward to that. So I think all of this, some of these statements have a certain context to please both the sides, whereas there are other statements that need to be taken more seriously.
I'll come to Afghanistan a little later, Pramit Paltrozi, but I want to first come to the elephant in the room. The elephant also happens to be the symbol of the opposition party to Mr. Obama, China. Both India and America have serious reservations about China, but neither wants to endanger their relationship with this critically important country. Is there a point at which India and America's views on China converge to the benefit of both?
Well, yes, I think what we'll hopefully see in the joint statement, because we saw a bit of it in September and we'll see a continuation of that, is language about support for freedom of navigation, which in other words means South China Sea, China's actions in the South China Sea, to some degree in Senkaku Islands, are something that neither of them support. They may even have language about the UN law of the sea, because China's actions in the South China Sea are clearly in violation of UNCLOS. And that's probably about as far as they will go. You'll have something about India joining MTCR, where America will support, and the Americans are now saying privately that they hope within 1 year they'll see India join MTCR. The point is, once we join MTCR, we then can sell the BrahMos cruise missile to Vietnam, which will be basically a Chinese Navy sinking missile. All of these are little bits and pieces of where we stand regarding where both sides agree that some of the actions of China are clearly something that we have to be concerned about, because they are aggressive, assertive, and clearly designed to destabilize, shall we say, the present structure of power in Asia. But on the other hand, as you said, neither side is going to openly come out and say we want to contain one, because we don't actually, neither of us believes we can contain China.
So these are issues that will be discussed perhaps intensely behind closed doors, but publicly they'll be very discreet and careful and
And there'll be
cautious.
coded language within it. And I think the other key will be how often you mention Japan.
Absolutely. Come to Afghanistan. I know it's almost the other end of the world from Japan, but let's do a geographical leap. American troop numbers are now down to 10,000. If you add in their allies, they're roughly around 12,000. What sort of assurances will Mr. Modi want from President Obama about the future of events in that country? And what sort of assurances is Mr. Obama in a position to give?
Well, I think Mr. Obama has now made it clear that there will be a residual presence of American troops there. And I think that's what India would feel reassured
But
about.
residual is really the operative word. We're down to 10,000 American troops already.
Well, a symbolic presence is also important to prevent the Taliban from taking over Afghanistan. And so that is one. The other is during the September visit, we saw a remarkable convergence of views between the US and India on Afghanistan. I think the Modi government has actually said, we appreciate what you're doing, don't go out of Afghanistan that fast. And so
actually, Mr. Modi, if I understood what he said in Washington correctly, was advocating that, in fact, America should reverse its withdrawal, not just slow it down.
Well, I think
which was ignored by Washington.
No, but I think Washington knows that India traditionally wanted foreign troops to get out of the region, but this time there's an Indian Prime Minister who's saying, why are you leaving?
So even if the Indian Prime Minister's statement sounds the opposite of what the President is doing, nonetheless, he appreciates this U-turn.
It'd be very welcome. And I think the Americans want to have India play a bigger role in Afghanistan and in the region.
You know, Krishna Srinivasan, India is deeply concerned by the possibility that the Taliban could come to power in Kabul. Do you believe that concern is shared by Washington? Because if it is, it would actually, in a sense, contradict what they're doing. Because if Taliban does come to power, 14 years of American intervention and involvement would have been nullified overnight. Or do you believe the Americans have already factored that in and are prepared for it?
I think everything points to the fact that the United States is looking for a way in getting the Taliban to engage in discussions with the Afghan government. And whether these negotiations will be joined by Pakistan and the United States as well is not clear. But it seems to me that even China is engaged in this this exercise, if you like, of introducing the Taliban into a negotiating role in Afghanistan. The United States is well aware of this, and this is what gives Pakistan some lasting influence on American policy in Afghanistan. This is all pretty bad news as far as we're concerned. If you look at the release of the prisoners recently from Guantanamo, the rendition of a Taliban executive from Afghanistan to Pakistan, and various other indications, you will see that it all points to a desire to have a negotiation as quickly as possible, and certainly before 2016, which is the deadline for an American pullout. So I think that this is all really, as I say, unfortunate news for India, and I think it requires a very serious discussion between India and the United States.
Sanjay Baru, one of the interesting things is that the two other heads of government with whom our Prime Minister has established a personal rapport are Tony Abbott of Australia and Shinzo Abe of Japan. And those are two countries that America regards as special allies. Is there a sense in which you're seeing a four-way relationship emerging, or is this a little bit of journalistic exaggeration?
Not at all. In fact, that is what is the most interesting thing that has happened in the last 6 months. There's a clear direction to Prime Minister Modi's foreign policy. A strategic engagement, not just with the United States, but with the allies of the United States and the Asian allies, Japan and Australia. And I think which is why I regard this visit of President Obama in January 2015 as significant. It's not about the Republic Day parade. I think we are, in a very short period of time, clinching a process that began with Prime Minister Vajpayee calling India and the United States natural allies, which then ended with the nuclear deal in 2005, and then a relationship that weakened between 2008, when there's a financial crisis, and Obama's kind of vision went away into domestic issues, as well as he was trying to reach out to China because of the crisis, and to Pakistan for reasons best known to him, and India went off the radar. India has come back onto the radar after May 2014. And I think what we are seeing in the last 5 months, Mr. Modi's visits to Australia, to Japan, there is a new strategic policy that is being formulated. And in the next 3-4 days, that is going to consolidate it. So we are really seeing history being made.
In that context, Ajay Shukla, of a new convergence taking place, a new strategic dimension coming into India's policy with America, possibly Japan and Australia, do you see a military dimension? Do you see the Malabar exercises now including Australia? Earlier it didn't. Do you see it including Japan? Do you see a military dimension to what Sanjay is talking about becoming another important aspect of it?
Well, the military dimension, Karan, you would recall, was already evident as far back as 2007, when the Malabar exercise was a 5-nation exercise that particular year. Japan, Australia, United States, India, and Singapore all participated. But the difference between then and now potentially could be that when China conveyed its concern at that time and, made out that there was a sort of ganging up against it, the Manmohan Singh government and particularly the Antony ministry pulled back and went back to bilateral Malabar exercises. Now this time you're seeing the Indian advance, as it were, going forward again. And I would bet that you would, if next year's Malabar again incorporates, let's say, 3 or 4 countries, you will see China pushing back against this. What will be interesting to see is whether this time the Indian government pulls back or this time it holds its ground. But, if one looks at the play out of regional dynamics in the Indo-Pacific, Indian analysts complain about a string of pearls, but if you look at the string of pearls that India is constructing around China, starting from Japan, South Korea, Philippines, Vietnam, Indonesia, you name it, Singapore, I would say that what China is doing is really just a flea bite. So we'll have to see which way this plays out as China pushes back.
We're talking about strings of pearl, Pramit Pal Chaudhary, and it sounds almost like we're having a discussion about jewelry. But do you see one of the gems emerging, as Sanjay was sort of hinting, the possibility of a complete significant realignment of India's foreign policy relationships?
Well, what Modi has done since he's come to office is indicated my number one problem is that I have inherited a disaster of an economy. And my foreign policy, therefore, should be about trying to build this very tight convergence between my economic requirements and my foreign policy. Partly on an ad hoc basis, but partly as he's progressed, he's realized that the countries that are most likely to help him build up and get his economy going are, in fact, American allies, are America, Japan, Australia, Southeast Asia. He flirted with the Chinese. Chinese came in but have given far less than he had hoped or even than they had promised. Russia has very little to offer us economically. So therefore you end up in a situation where he's already noticed that on the economic front, my foreign policy is very clear. Those countries that are close to the West are the ones that can contribute most. In addition, when he looks at his foreign policy security challenges, whether it's terrorism, cybersecurity, the vast bulk of the attacks against Indian cybersecurity emanate from China, or at least from Chinese servers. Again, he ends up seeing that the same convergence happens, that the Western countries are the ones that he really needs to be working with. So therefore, I wouldn't say it's swift change. It's something that I think Manmohan Singh would have disagreed with almost nothing in this.
But he's pushing it a lot faster than Manmohan Singh did.
His ability is to implement, and that's the shift.
What the audience is going to detect in that answer from Pramit and earlier from what you heard as an analysis from Sanjay Baru is that there is a distinct westward shift happening in India's positions. Whether it's happening for economic reasons, whether it's happening for military and strategic reasons, is actually not important. What's important is that, for a variety of reasons, there's a westward shift in India's thinking.
I won't call it a westward shift because, the center of gravity is shifting east. So when you look at the countries you even mentioned, Japan, Australia.
Westward shift in the sense that we're more in line with Western countries, Western supporting countries, even if that alignment is happening to the east.
No, in the post-Cold War period, what is the West? So we have made our choices. And Mr. Vajpayee said, The US is a natural ally. And we're looking at our interests. Our interests are in this region, in the Indo-Pacific region.
But with the US as a critical ally, with Australia and Japan, who are all American allies. That's the point I'm making.
The US is everywhere, but in our region, we are having stronger relationships with the countries that matter in the region.
Come in, Frederick.
I think there is a risk to read a little too much in this move, because what we have seen over the past few months, a very dynamic foreign policy, but basically continuing and trying to expand what was already starting on the previous government. On the military dimension, I mean, there is very little new, if anything, between, for example, India and Japan, India and Australia, and so on. And in terms of actual political commitment vis-à-vis one another, this is as limited as it was before. So in the terms, we have seen something which is, on the cosmetic aspect, much more dynamics. On the content, we have moved perhaps from a very assertive caution to some sort of an assertive, very cautious assertiveness.
Okay.
There is no major difference in what we've seen so far.
I can see Sanjay Baru vigorously nodding his head. I'm going to give you the last word. Is this simply, as Frederick Raz says, more of the same? Is it simply, as Mr. Mansingh says, no, it's not westward shift at all, it's actually all happening to the east, which it may be? Or are we moving at a faster pace, more sure of our direction, more clearly aligning with the West, and therefore, in many important ways, taking a new posture militarily, economically, and in foreign policy?
Well, first of all, I mean, to what Frederick said, I think it's like when you watch a big ship moving, you think of it as incremental change, slow change, but the change nevertheless. And I don't think it's cosmetic. I mean, I wouldn't use the word cosmetic. It may be very gradual when you look at it from a distance, that these shifts that are happening, but they're very definite shifts, very definite shifts. And I have seen some of this fairly closely.
And westward shifts?
No, the word West, I mean, I agree with Ambassador Mansingh when he doesn't want to use the word West, because it appears as if it was with the NATO and the Western powers. I don't think we are looking at a special relationship, for example, with any European power. Europe doesn't really figure very important.
But with America.
But of course, America is an Asian power. And that is the point Ambassador Mansingh is making, that when you look east, you cannot avoid the United States. It's an Asian power. It's a Pacific power. So actually, India's look east policy requires a strategic relationship with the United States and Japan and Australia. So in that sense, it's not a westward look, but an eastward look that brings us closer to the United States.
Look east, and you'll end up west. America.
The world is round.
We're not moving towards America. America is coming closer to us. Gentlemen, let's end on that note. My thanks to all four of you for coming to the studio. My thanks also to Ajay Shukla and Krishna Srinivasan for joining me. And there we end this particular episode. Of course, we'll be back covering the Obama visit in great detail. So join me on my program To The Point on Monday night and again on Tuesday night, both times at 8 o'clock, when we will be discussing President Obama, what he's doing, and then finally, what this visit has achieved. But for now, goodbye.
Fits in very well with programs of leaders from democratic countries when they're abroad, and especially when their country is demanding their presence in one way or another, politically, economically, or whatever. So I think that
may well be understandable. Let me stop you there. That may well be understandable, and that may well be a second concern that the American president has in mind.
I
want to come, Sanjay Baru, to Pakistan, because when you talk about India-American relations, whether we like it or not, Pakistan is always the elephant in the room. Now, in recent days, we've had reports that America has warned Islamabad against any untoward incident while Obama is in India. Earlier, Kerry warned Pakistan to take tough action against the LET. News reports suggest that, in fact, Pakistan has banned JUD. Welcome back to Nothing But the Truth in a special one-hour episode on the Obama visit. Remember, the American president arrives Sunday morning at 10 a.m. We turn now to the political dimension of this critical visit. Lalit Mansingh, does this visit signal a sea change, or at least a significant upgradation in the relationship? To quote one of your successors as Foreign Secretary, Shamsaran, he says, the visit is the cake. Would you agree?
The visit is the cake.
That's his exact words.
No, this is the first
Not the visit takes the cake, the visit is the cake.
Okay. I think there's much more substance than just the symbolism of a visit. To my mind, this is the first time a foreign head of state comes to India and discusses serious business. Republic Day is generally a celebration. There's a lot of substance going with this. I won't say it's a transformational visit. It's not groundbreaking because the ground has been broken already. But in terms of seriousness of meetings, this would rank very high. It would rank along with the Manmohan Singh's visit in 2005. It would rank with Modi's visit to Washington in September and now.
Krishnan Srinivasan, we've heard news on Saturday afternoon that President Obama has cancelled the Agra trip to see the Taj. And the explanation being given is that he's going to Saudi Arabia to attend the funeral, or not the funeral, but the funeral obsequies of the late King Abdullah. Now, one explanation being given by sources is that the Saudis objected to the fact that if Obama hadn't gone, they were going to get Fala Insaniyat, although those news reports are now being questioned a little bit. But side by side, PTI has also reported that the Americans and the British have together told Pakistan, either hand over Zakir Rahman Lakvi to India or to one of us, because he needs to be brought to justice. Now, if all of that is true, and perhaps that is a big if, does it suggest that the Americans are beginning to apply pressure on Pakistan on India's behalf?
Well, first of all, to use the correct zoological metaphor, the elephant in the room when India and the United States meet is China. Pakistan is the monkey in the room. So I think we need to get...
I'll permit you that little bit of
we need to
insult to Pakistan.
No, I mean, in terms of magnitude, I mean, the real elephant in the room is China.
I would say the dragon in the room.
The dragon. But, well...
The Vice President Biden and Obama felt he couldn't offend a critical ally. From the Indian government's point of view, is that understandable, or will the Indian government be a little disappointed?
Well, I think it's understandable. I think the Saudis would have expected the President of the USA to be there for the King's funeral. And I think to that extent, considering the relationship that the Saudis and the Americans have had over such a long period, I think it is understandable, though regrettable. Okay. But I must say again that, you know, as an aside, that it's very difficult, I think, for the head of an important democratic country to be seen having a quote-unquote holiday anywhere, sightseeing. It's not something that